BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
At the end of July, like something out of I, Claudius, the President of the Republic of Niger was deposed by the leader of the Presidential Guard. President Mohamed Bazoum, elected in 2021, was ousted by Abdurrahman Chiani in a country recently seen as something of a beacon of democracy in a chronically unstable region. This week, as the military junta named a new government, the leaders of a regional union known as ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, met to discuss what to do about the situation in Niger. Their dilemma is whether or not to intervene directly to restore the legitimate president. But how much should we in the rest of the world worry about it? Isn't it just another coup in a far-off country we know little or nothing about? Step inside the briefing room and together we'll find out. Finally, I want to find out what this means for the future of the country, the surrounding region, and for the rest of us. Joining me in the briefing room now are Nabila Ramdani, French-Algerian journalist and author of an upcoming book, Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic, and Olayinka Ajala, senior lecturer in politics and international relations at Leeds Beckett University. Olayinka Ajala, if I can start with you, there might be some people listening to this programme who are thinking to themselves, why should I be worried about what's happening in Niger? Can you tell us why Niger might matter to the West?
I think there are about three main reasons why Niger matters. The first one is because of the geographical location. Niger sits right at the center of the Sahel and shares border with 7 other African countries. In the last couple of years, especially in 2015, 2016, we saw what happened with the large numbers of immigrants, illegal immigrants, coming to Europe through the Mediterranean, many of them losing their lives. So Niger, because of their strategic location, the country was a major hub for illegal immigration across the Sahel through Libya into Europe. But what's happened was about 12 years ago when Niger returned to democracy. The country has been a very good ally to the West because they've signed bilateral and multilateral agreements with the EU and some other countries to curb illegal migration through the country. And this has worked really well. We've seen numbers coming down over the years. So that's the first point. The second one is Niger is a partner to France, the US, and also to other African countries to combat terrorism and also to combat trafficking, illegal trafficking, human trafficking, drug and weapon trafficking. So that's another reason Niger has been partnering with other countries to work on these issues and to reduce these menaces. And then the third one is also because of the broader security architecture of the Sahel. So the US, they have one of their biggest drone bases outside of America in Niger, in Agadez. So they provide surveillance, flight, whereby they gather information and then feed back to their partners in the fight against insurgency and terrorism in the region. So when we look at those three factors, we will understand that it's important. Niger is strategically important to the West.
Nabila Ramdani, can I come to you and ask you about the region more generally? Why is the Sahel region apparently so prone to unrest, so much so that Niger had come to be seen as this, if you like, this kind of big place where you could reside your hopes for stability?
Well, the Sahel is an absolutely enormous area of sub-Saharan Africa. It straddles around a dozen countries, from Eritrea to Senegal via Niger, and it's an area that has been largely lawless for centuries. Centuries-old trade routes, once associated with nefarious activities, including slavery, have become conduits for newer types of criminal commerce, such as the trafficking of arms, drugs, and contraband. And it is so big that it is very hard to police, if not impossible. And so criminal groups, and increasingly terrorist ones, use it to set up their bases and to attack sovereign countries within the region. The lack of jobs, basic social services, and effective state institutions within the Sahel have, in fact, drawn more and more locals into the criminal economy and indeed into insurgent activity.
Can you tell us a little bit about its relationship with France? Because, like a lot of the other countries here, this was a former French colony. Has the French colonial experience actually contributed anything to the degree of instability in the region?
Well, very much so, David. It's 63 years since Niger officially gained independence from France. So you'd think that France would be free of all involvement in what's going on right now, but that's by no means the case. And despite the illusion of complete withdrawal, France has a garrison of 1,500 troops in Niger, together with an air force base servicing fighter jets and attack drones, for example. And all of this is a forceful reminder that in spite of a long and bloody period of decolonization, France has in fact retained a quasi-empire in Africa by stealth, and it is under threat like never before. And so the current crisis in Niger can be linked to former colonial relationships being restructured as what's known as France-Afrique, meaning a formidable neo-colonial nexus across sub-Saharan Africa, encompassing economic, political, security and cultural ties and alliances centered on the French language and French values.
Olayinka, in March this year, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken called Niger a model of democracy. Was this more a statement made in hope than expectation, or was it genuinely believed at that point that Niger was stable?
I think it's a combination of hope and expectation. And when he made that statement, I shared that feelings as well, because I was at the end of writing an article where I used the case study of Nigeria and Niger as beacons of hope to democracy in the region. So I did a comparative analysis, and unfortunately, I didn't publish the article. It was a journal article when this happened. So yes, it's a combination of hope and expectation. Niger returned to democracy in 2011, and President Issoufou, the former President Issoufou, did an excellent job of holding down democracy for 10 years, the first time in the history of Niger, and also transitioning to another democratically elected government of President Bazoum. So that again was a first in the history of Niger. So it was becoming more stable. Lots of people in the country were already embracing, and many are still embracing democracy until this happened. So many people didn't see it coming, but the problem is the issue of fragility of this region, especially of Francophone Africa, as Nabila just highlighted. These issues have not disappeared. When you compare Francophone Africa with Anglophone Africa, you would see that most of the least developed countries in the world are in Francophone Africa. Many of these countries, they've seen the large numbers of military troops and military bases without a corresponding economic development. This poses a serious challenge to the region, not just to Niger, but the region.
Nabila, we know that ECOWAS are meeting today in Abuja, Nigeria, to discuss the political situation in Niger. Can you just explain to us what ECOWAS is and what the significance of such a meeting is?
ECOWAS is the economic community of West African states, a regional political and economic union of 15 countries, all located in West Africa. Now, the main significance of this meeting should be that all these African states are showing a strong, united front, but the reality is that they are failing to do this. They are very used to organizing emergency summits, but they're certainly not coming up with effective solutions to their mounting problems. And what's very clear in this particular case is that there is no united military front. These states do not want to go to war over a coup in Niger. On the contrary, they fear that any military intervention could embolden other radical forces across the region and that even more insurrections would break out.
Olenka, could you tell us just a little bit about the man who is now in charge in Niger? We're used to the heads of armies taking over, but this is just the head of the Presidential Guard. Who is he, and what do you think has motivated his move?
Right. So Abdurrahman Tiani is or was, I think I can use was now because he's the de facto ruler. He was the head of the Presidential Guard. The Presidential Guard in Niger is something you can liken to like special forces. So they belong to an elite arm of the military, very sophisticated, very well equipped, well armed. They provide security to the presidency and to other major infrastructures in the country. So Abdurrahman Tiani, I think he's been the head of these organizations since 2011. He was directly working with the presidency. He worked with President Issoufou, and when President Issoufou was president, and he's been working with President Bazoum. So there are rumors that there was an impending restructuring of the military. And that was one of the reasons why he moved to carry out this coup d'etat. Because when you look at what happened at that time, for almost 48 hours, the military were quiet. It was the Presidential Guard led by Tiani that led this coup. So it took a while before the military came on board and then said, yes, we agree to be part of this. So that still tells us it wasn't as planned as been discussed in some quarters. Interestingly, before Bazoum was inaugurated, about 48 hours before the inauguration of President Bazoum, there was a coup attempt, and it was this same General Tiani that fought off the attackers in order to preserve democracy at that time. So it is interesting that he is the one who now is leading this junta and who is the de facto leader at the moment.
Nabila, you'll have been watching other countries' reaction to this. What have you noted about America's response to the coup in Niger, and what do you estimate they will be aiming to do?
Well, senior United States diplomats have visited Niger to push coup authorities to restore democratic rule after the overthrow of President Bazoum, but they evidently haven't been very successful. Victoria Nuland, who's the US acting deputy Secretary of State, said on Monday that she held what she called frank and difficult talks with military leader Moussa Salah Oubammou and 3 of his colonels in Niger, in the capital, Niamey. It was the first trip by a US official to the country since the coup on July the 26th. Admittedly, Nuland's requests to meet with Bazoum and Abdurrahman Tiani, the self-proclaimed head of the military government, were denied. She reported about the briefing afterwards with reporters, and she offered, dare I say, a grim assessment of her talks with the military leaders, saying that they are quite firm in their view of how they want to proceed, and that doesn't comport with the constitution of Niger. So she quite frankly highlighted that it was a difficult day, and she, however, reaffirmed that the US would be committed to a negotiated solution to the conflict. If the coup leaders were willing to return to Niger's constitutional order, then America would be prepared to help with that. But frankly, I'm a bit skeptical about that happening.
OK, I think we need to try and push this forward. And I think the first question, Nabila, is can we anticipate that in Niger, as in some of the other countries, we'll see a significant expansion of Russian influence via the Wagner Group?
Well, the Wagner troops are certainly stationed in nearby Mali, but there is no evidence of them being in Niger itself yet. And coup leaders in Niger have certainly called for help from Russia's Wagner mercenaries after neighboring countries threatened military intervention if the country's ousted president was not restored by Sunday. General Salifou Modi, one of the Nigerian officers leading the coup, made the request on a visit to neighboring Mali. So what we are effectively seeing in Niger being played out is another Cold War by proxy. You've got the old colonial powers being ousted, while new regimes, including Russia, China, and indeed Turkey, closing in on the region.
Olenka, if I could just ask you this, a recent UN report, actually this July, said that there was a significant level of popular support for recent military coups. And this was symptomatic of a wave of feeling that was expanding across the continent. How much do you think we should worry about that?
Yeah, we should worry about that because when you look at ECOWAS has had 15 democracies at some point, because it's composed of 15 countries. 4 of these are falling into the hand of the military. And that is why the organization is afraid. The leaders are afraid. And the question is, if we don't take a firm position, we don't know what country is next.
Olayinka Ajala there with Nabila Ramdani. My thanks to them and to Paul Melly and Garay Amadou. And my conclusion on the question of does Niger matter? As small boats cross the Channel and larger ones sink in the Mediterranean, John Donne's words resonate. These bells also toll for us. You've been listening to The Briefing Room with me, David Aaronovitch. The producers were Ben Carter, Alex Pickles and Kirstine Knight. The editor was Penny Murphy and the programme was mixed by Rod Farker. Another edition of this podcast will be along again soon.